Here's another foot that has a guide on it, similar to the guide that we saw with the 1/4 inch foot. In this case, this foot has a guide in the middle. When you're doing dressmaking and patchworking, often you'll come across something called quilting in the ditch or sewing in the ditch. And that is where you've got a seam between two pieces of material. You may want to actually stitch down into that seam. Okay, the reason you might want to do that is because it might reduce the bulk of the seam itself. That may be one reason you want to do it. Or it may be that you're quilting, you want to quilt in those seam allowances to create a sort of a puffed up effect of the main piece. And if you quilt around each of the seams, it would almost be like pushing down those seams to allow that the main part of the work to spring and press back up. You can do quilting or sewing in the ditch by eye. It is tricky. You have to really concentrate, because as soon as you come out of that ditch, the ditch being your seam allowance, not your seam allowance, your actual seam, it's very visible that you've sort of popped out of it, because you've got that tiny little line of the seam allowance and you're sewing on top of it and you're trying to sew here. If you pop out, it can be quite hard and very visible. What this foot does, let me just show you the other side. It's got that blade here, or the guide here, is this guide would sit in the ditch and it would aim to just push the fabric of the seam just slightly away and keep you, if you like, almost like a train track in that ditch. So it would keep your foot and your needle then in that train, as it in that track of the seam as it travels down. I'm not a great fan of stitching in the ditch. I'm not a great fan of quilting in the ditch, so I don't use this a lot. But if it is something that you think you would use, having this guide here makes it so much easier than it would have been otherwise.